Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Robust Opposition. We've got a really packed show tonight, and I'm really pleased and proud to have with me my friend Ryan Grimm, who has been on my show before, actually in my house. I did a book talk for him, his book, We Got People. And he just did the reporting that broke in the Intercept last night, which revealed this whole brouhaha about Alex Morse to be a manufactured hit job. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for having me here, and thank you again for the book event out at your place. That was a lot of fun. It was fun to meet a lot of people in your neighborhood.
Yeah, they really like to see you and hear you. So set the scene for the viewers. Who is Alex Morse, who is Richie Neal, who he's challenging, and what was the status of this race right before these allegations hit?
So Richie Neal was the former mayor of Springfield and was elected to Congress in 1988. Has served consecutively since then, and has recently risen to the chairmanship of the Ways and Means Committee, which puts him. Oh, the mailman is here at my house, and so the dog is losing her mind.
Okay.
So, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is historically has been one of the most powerful people in Washington. Nancy Pelosi has centralized a lot of power in the Speaker's office to a degree that has kind of disempowered the Ways and Means chairman to some extent. But any bill that involves taxing and spending, more or less, which means pretty much any bill, has to run through the Ways and Means Committee. And so the chairman of that panel has an enormous amount of influence over every bill. So if Richie Neal comes back and is chairman of Ways and Means in 2021, the legislation that comes out of the House will be different than if he loses and is replaced by Lloyd Doggett, who is kind of the second ranking Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee and would be most likely to rise to that position and is a much more progressive member of the committee.
Alex, he's against the Green New Deal. He's against Medicare for all. He takes money from the hospital corporations. He takes money from BlackRock. Go on.
Right. So it's not Doggett, but Neal. Yeah, that's right. So Alex Morse is when he was 21, he ran for mayor of Holyoke, small college town in the district, and has been serving as mayor there for the last 10 years. And has the backing of Justice Democrats. He's supportive of a Green New Deal, Medicare for all. Excuse me. And Morse is actually an interesting case because he's not somebody that comes out of movement circles. He's not a kind of a social justice activist who's been in the streets in the same way as somebody like a Cori Bush, for instance. But in an important way, the Alex Morses of the world are the ones that the left needs to win over if their revolution is going to take over the Democratic Party. In other words, Morse himself was a member of the College Democrats at Brown. He clearly wanted a career in politics. He ran for mayor as a 21-year-old. And you want, ambitious young people like that who want careers in politics to survey the landscape and say, you know what? The best way for me to move forward in politics in the Democratic Party is to embrace the kind of the platform and the message of Justice Democrats. Whereas in the 90s, somebody coming out who wanted a career in politics would say, well, the best way for me to get ahead is to be the next Rahm Emanuel. And then you wind up with a whole generation of Rahm Emanuels. And so Morse, is challenging Richie Neal for the congressional seat in Western Massachusetts. His campaign released an internal poll showing Neal up 45-35 a few weeks ago, which puts Neal in an awfully bad position. An incumbent under 50 with several weeks to go often loses because if you are not telling a pollster with a few weeks to go that you're supportive of the incumbent, then when election day comes, you're probably going to end up voting for the challenger. That was before the allegations landed last Friday, though.
Okay, so what were the allegations, and list which reputable publications publish this like stenographers without even doing any independent fact checking as you did?
Well, so the Daily Collegian, which is the Amherst, UMass Amherst paper, is the one that ran with them. Coincidentally, ironically, Richie Neal has been teaching a journalism class for 22 years in that program. But the way that the college Democrats went about it was clever in order to turn a rumor into a story. Now we should be actually, let's be clear about a couple of things. On the one hand, somebody can be the victim of a premeditated smear campaign and also separately be guilty of various offenses. Like those two things can go hand in hand. Now, we don't know that they go hand in hand here, and it's important that we have evidence before we accuse anybody of anything. But for years, around Amherst particularly, and also around the district, there were just rumors about the fact that Alex Morse was dating young men and was on Tinder and was on dating apps, and not necessarily that he was doing anything wrong, but just people gossiping about his private life, about his sex life, because he was this young mayor that people were interested in. And so there was always this conversation that swirled around him. And so the college Democrats kind of knew that conversation existed, and essentially kind of weaponized it. And what they did is they sent a letter to Morse saying, "You're no longer welcome at our events." Now, that should have been a red flag, number one. A, you don't disinvite someone from an event that isn't scheduled. We're in a pandemic. There are no events. He hadn't been at an event since October. So the claim they were making was that at their events that he would try to pick up college students. It turned out that the plural there was deeply misleading. He had only been to one event during his campaign, and he had only talked to one student after that event. That student was the college Democrats president who'd been on a panel with him. He wrote back something like, "Thanks for the note. Sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable." In the middle of this, by the way, in April, there was conversation about a donation between the Morse campaign and the college Democrats. He never made the donation. He explained to them that all their money was going to COVID relief. So in April, they were hitting him up for a donation. So they send this letter. He replies, "Sorry if I made anybody comfortable," something along those lines. And then the college Democrats immediately leak it to the local college paper. And what's clever about that move is now you don't have to interrogate the underlying allegations. All you do as a college paper is you report, college Democrats have barred Morse, and Morse has apologized for making them feel a certain way.
Right.
And boom, then you have the story. And then because they had tried to leak this to Politico back in June, and Politico had made some calls attempting to confirm it, attempting to nail it down, as a good reporter would do, and weren't able to, and so didn't run the story. Nobody was coming forward with any specific allegations or any specific people who were involved. Because Politico had worked on it before, they immediately jumped on it. You can question whether or not that should have been done. But there's this kind of convention in journalism that if somebody else has already reported it, then you can report on it because now it's a matter of public controversy. And then Politico's headline said something like Justice Democrats candidate, accused of sexually inappropriate behavior.
That's just so typical of Politico. You know how they tried to smear Bernie and anybody in the Bernie movement. And oftentimes I found out the headline writer is not the same person as the reporter.
That's right. Well,
I've talked to reporters and they've told me I didn't write the headline. I said that was a pretty unfair headline, or it was misleading because that's not what your article was about. And
right. No, that's right. They don't. That headline is interesting too, because Morse has talked about over the past few days as this immensely powerful figure who was able to use this immense power as leverage, to partner with young men. But the editors at Politico, clearly didn't think anybody had heard of him. When you don't use a person's name in the headline, that's because people sat around and said, is anybody going to know who Alex Morse is?
Yeah.
And people said no. And so, okay, well, what do we call him? And so in the headline, they called him Justice Democrat Candidate. That's a clue right there. This is not actually a national
okay,
figure.
So this came out, I believe it was Friday, and the reaction was pretty swift and pretty definitive. Describe what the reaction was from basically the progressive groups who had endorsed him or were considering endorsing him, and social media. So
the reaction was he's done. He should be banished from polite society, and the allegation that was circulating and that the college Democrats really hammered home, and they kept using the phrase in writing, which is an interesting tell. They kept saying he has admitted in writing to sleeping with students. Now, remember, Morse is 31. Most college students are over the age of 18. What happened is that the public on Twitter in particular started to say he was sleeping with his students, because it turned out from the age of 25 till the age of about 30, he was teaching a semester as an adjunct at UMass Amherst, some government course, where these types of courses. I believe it was an unpaid gig. This a lot of journalists do this, and what they do is they kind of bring in guest lecturers. They bring in their friends. Every class will have a different one of their friends or another influential figure who will share their life experiences and their wisdom with the class. Like this is not like a typical type of faculty. Like I said, Richie Neal does the same thing. Richie Neal teaches one class at UMass Amherst. You wouldn't necessarily call Richie Neal a member of the UMass Amherst faculty. But what people started saying is that he was sleeping with his students. That allegation had never been made, but it just kind of stuck anyway.
Well, I'll tell you, when I first heard about it, I thought it was pretty clear that, maybe I read more than other people did, that it wasn't his students. And my reaction, to be perfectly honest with people, was, you know what, this doesn't sound like it's problematic behavior if they weren't his students. But the thing is, and we can see this with Katie Hill, when you're in politics, your behavior has to be beyond reproach. It can't just be what liberal woke people think is okay. You're running also with conservatives, supposedly voting for you. And it's almost like you have to be concerned about the optics, even if you're right. And that was my initial thing. And I remember hanging my hat on the fact that he apologized if his behavior made anyone feel uncomfortable. So that's why I kind of thought maybe there was something there. Right. And also I wanted to ask you is that the college Democrats made this decision independently of what you're about to reveal was behind this thing. They made this decision independently not to have him come to meetings. So maybe there was something that somebody really did feel uncomfortable about. But what I also noticed about that was that the leadership made this decision on behalf of the members without necessarily polling the members. So that kind of sucked too.
There was no discussion with the membership, and they also did not remotely follow any of the guidelines that the college has set up, the university has set up for reporting these types of situations. They went straight to Morse, and as soon as they had the goods in the form of his response, they took that directly to the college paper.
Yeah. Now, when did you decide that you wanted to independently investigate this story, and how did you go about tracking down these original texts without revealing your sources?
So I read the stories like everybody else did, and I remember getting to the bottom of them and scrolling back up and continuing to try to scroll down to thinking there's got to be more to this story. Is there a second page that I'm not jumping to? who are, and the most important question was who, who is the victim here? Who is the survivor here? Like, who is the person or the people who are harmed, who are making these allegations, and what are the allegations? That's the starting point from any attempt to adjudicate whether there has been wrongdoing. You first have to know what the doing was before you can know whether it was wrong. And so you look and you find that there actually isn't anything. You say, okay, well, maybe there's a lot going on here, and we're going to soon learn more, as is the pattern in a lot of these Me Too cases, where a true predator has been exposed. That the news breaks, people condemn him, and the condemnation then, in some ways, very rightfully, creates the space for people to come forward to also tell their story that corroborates the stories of the original courageous survivors who did come forward. Now, in some ways, they were trying to short circuit that first step, that to sort of create the environment without a survivor coming forward first. Now, so then you would expect, if there's a lot going on there, a lot of predatory behavior that has left a trail of people that are harmed, that you've now created a situation where people will feel comfortable at minimum to talk to journalists on background in confidence to back up the people who came forward. I can't tell you the number of people, people who have been assaulted and harassed who I've talked to, who say, I'm coming forward because I want to support so-and-so who came forward. Like, what she did took so much strength that I feel it's my obligation, even though it's hard for me, to come forward and tell my story. So in this case, you didn't have that. There was no single person. Nobody's really coming forward to defend the integrity and the courage of the College Democrats chapter. Like, it's not a thing.
Yeah.
And so a couple time goes by, and nobody came forward. This shoe you're waiting for to drop just never dropped. And so, as I was expressing skepticism about the quality of the evidence that had so far been presented, often, if I do that, I will hear from people who have been harmed, and that leads me to be able to break news about the situation. I saw your post. If you want some confirmation of this, here it is. Talk to this person. She's willing to talk. He's willing to talk. In this case, instead, I started hearing from a lot of people at the university who said there's something fishy going on. And eventually, I don't know exactly how much I can say about where people came from and how they got to me, but partly
people came to you. People came to you,
and people came to other people who said go to Ryan.
Yeah.
And so there's actually, it turns out, can be virtue in the reporting process of being public about the questions that you're asking, because then the broader public that has those answers is gonna come your way. And if they don't see you asking the questions, if they reach out to somebody else, that person will be like, let me connect you with Ryan Grimm, because I saw that he's covering this issue. He's talking about this.
Okay, so to short circuit it for people who don't know this story, what was it that you found out?
Essentially, that the current president of the College Democrats and the prior president of the College Democrats had kind of known about the kind of rumors swirling around Morse, for a very long time, and as far back as last fall, were considering ways that they could acquire evidence that would basically destroy Morse's campaign. One of the the students referred to himself as a Neil Stan, was taking a journalism class with Richie Neal. Richie Neal is known and speaks openly about having hired a lot of his former journalism students. He said he wanted to make, he wanted Richie Neal to be his in to politics. And,
and we can name him because you name him. He's all over social media, Timothy Ennis.
Right. Well, he used to be. I mean, he's retreated from a lot of his social media activity. I think that, he 2021. I don't think his life should be ruined for, what he did here. I don't think that he was considering, what he was trying to do to Alex Morse's life. And I suspect that, and I think I even saw some college Democrats posting last night saying something like, remember that there are real people's lives here, because college Democrats were getting so much criticism for the way that they handled this. And that's absolutely true. And we should remember that, but they needed to remember that too, to publicly annihilate someone as a predator, not just destroys their career, can destroy their entire life.
Absolutely.
And that never seemed to, like, in all of the chats that I reviewed, there didn't seem to be a moment's hesitation or any thought given to the gravity of what they were talking about.
A lot of people,
as you saw in the meme, like, did you see the meme with Krusty the Clown getting thrown? So it's posted in my story. The kid Tim, he posted a meme saying, this is me giving the story to Politico, and it's that meme where there are two police, and he put on their hats, horny police, dragging Krusty the Clown away in handcuffs out of this house. And it just does such a disservice to the movement for survivor justice, and makes a mockery of the entire thing, because so much of their letter was written in this solemn tone about people harmed,
right,
and people made uncomfortable, and there are so many people who are suffering the trauma of genuine assault and harassment, and they weaponize that, not just in a cynical way, but in a joking way. Like, it was kind of a joke. It was just kind of something right, funny that they were going to laugh about.
Well, a lot of people think this is kind of endemic to the type of person that would join the college Democrats, the establishment, training to be
I heard,
someone like,
yes.
Well, I mean, look what Hillary Clinton did. Her campaign in South Carolina against Obama in 2008, how they released that picture, Barack Hussein Obama dressed in African garb, that kind of dog whistling. This is like what the establishment is known for, but not what the progressive left is supposed to be known for. So,
it's important, though, to distinguish from what I've come to understand. It's really important to distinguish between the kids who are the young people who are in the leadership of college Democrats. That's a particular kind of student. That's one who's there for a very particular reason, and it's to get an internship with the local congressman and launch their career. And the rank and file club members who are there for a mixture of community building and genuinely trying to make the world a better place. And so I heard from a significant number of rank and file members of that club and other clubs who were absolutely appalled.
And a lot of them have left the club. I understand. They've resigned.
So college Democrats, the leadership is different than the rank and file. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so let's talk about the progressive left.
Same with the party.
Because I had asked you, what the reaction were for some of the progressive groups and maybe even progressive elected officials who had endorsed him or who were waiting. What was their initial reaction, and what's happening now?
So a lot of these these groups are they're driven by the energy from below in a significant way, and some to greater degrees than others. So there was kind of a spectrum of responses. One group that has pledged to spend $300,000 in that race against Richie Neal, this group Fight Corporate Monopolies, they never stepped back. They didn't back down at all. But what's interesting about that is they're not a membership group. They're a dark money group that gets their money from who knows where. They're linked to an organization, I can't remember the exact name. It's something like ACLU. It's like the Economic Liberties version of that, which actually gets some money from Omidyar, which is the same funder of the Intercept. But that's different than the political group, the C4 or the dark money group that's spending money. So because they're not a membership group, their leadership just makes a decision, and their leadership made the decision: we're not backing down, we're going forward. Whereas a group like Sunrise Movement, that's a genuine member organized model, even though they do get lots and lots of foundation money and other money from very rich progressive donors. They have a very decentralized, almost like anarcho-syndicalist kind of setup. And so, one of their coalitions on the ground in Western Mass, without actually consulting some of the other hubs, put out a scorched earth statement, talking about rape culture and actively unendorsing, which put the Sunrise Movement in a tough spot, because now they have to choose between what's the best move, both ethically and strategically, with regard to the race, but also what is the best way to keep the organization together. And so this is something that political scientists and movement thinkers have been writing about for years, the balance between what the organization does and the kind of the need to keep the organization together. And at the worst end of that spectrum, it becomes an organization that's only sticking around for the sake of the organization sticking around, which gets built on a rationale that if our organization isn't here, then we can't work on the mission that we're here to work for. They forget to work on that mission.
I want to just cut in, because when I read that it was only the Western Mass chapter that was unendorsing him and not the Sunrise Movement National, and that they had said they were not going to assign campaigners to his campaign, which would be the kids from the Western Mass hub, I thought to myself, wait, let me finish my thought. I thought to myself, maybe those kids had personal experience with Morse. So I was kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt for their unendorsement, because maybe they knew something being on the ground there that the rest of these organizations didn't know.
And I think that's wise, and I think we should not rule that possibility out. I think they very well may have heard from people who felt harmed by interactions with Morse, and so that leaves them entitled to make whatever decision that they want. But we as reporters and we as the public don't know what that is. We can't weigh that completely in the dark. So that does certainly complicate the questions.
Yeah. Today we read that, the new endorsements came fast and furious, just as Democrats put out a very powerful statement. Brand new Congress put out a powerful statement. Apparently he raised more money today, 150,000, I think, than any day prior. So do you think I have two questions. First of all, do you think that this faux scandal is actually going to help him rather than its original intent to hurt him? And also, what do you think this says about the woke left, that we're so willing to, like, now it's just anything that's inappropriate, we're willing to cancel somebody over?
Yes, and I hate to do this. I have to run pretty soon. But I think, I think it, so I'd say two things on the question of the woke left. On the one hand, you don't want to undermine the the Me Too movement broadly. You don't want to undermine the movement for survivor justice. People should remember that this is not a case of a man or woman coming forward and fabricating a story. What happened? Nobody actually came forward, and so it's not as if we should automatically disbelieve the next person that comes forward, because all that people were asking for in this situation was to hear from somebody, even if it happened to be confidentially. Just tell us tell us what the wrongdoing was, and then we can weight it using the different tools that the kind of Me Too movement has built up. The contemporaneous corroboration, multiple accusers, the different journalistic conventions that have appropriately built up around reporting on these stories would kick in, and those should continue to kick in. But at the same time, the left has to be a bit demanding of evidence, particularly if the source of the allegation is already known to be hostile to the progressive movement. The Amherst College Democrats or the UMass Amherst are well known to be not exactly like riding for the revolution, and that's totally fine. That should have been weighed in when people were asking the question, well, why isn't there any evidence here? But just in general, before coming to a conclusion, I think it would be useful for people to have some evidence.
Okay. I thought I would have you for my usual show length, which is 45 minutes, because
I'm sorry.
I still want to talk to you about Shahid and Kamala. I mean, I can condense my questions, but if you wouldn't mind, can you give me 15 more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So pivoting to
let me just tell, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just read my question while you're telling whoever you're telling.
Okay.
Pivoting to Shahid Buttar, who's challenging Nancy Pelosi. And I had him on my show a couple of months ago. Talk about the charges that have come out against him. And there's two sets of charges. One is sexual harassment by this Elizabeth Croydon, and the other is sexism, dismissiveness, and a whole host of other interpersonal bad attributes, pretty much, from his staff, 12 former staff members.
Right.
Talk about those charges really briefly, and then I'll get your reaction.
Right, and those charges have kind of been conflated into one in the public's mind. So on the one hand, there was the harassment allegation that you mentioned that was posted to Medium. That one has fallen apart fairly quickly. You can't ever say with 100% certainty that it didn't happen. But the more that has emerged around that particular allegation, I think the less reason there has been to give it credibility. On the other hand, when it comes to the staff, you have the dynamic of, well, okay, these are people who left in an acrimonious fashion. It was not a happy parting, and so whenever there is a breakup, you have to factor that into how you think about the complaints that people have about each other. At the same time, like you said, it's a slew of people making charges effectively that Shahid was a bad boss, that he was kind of people know what a bad boss is. Like that was effectively their argument. And they also added onto it that it was tinged with misogyny. Shahid counters by saying that in fact there were just fundamental strategic and style differences between myself and these campaigners, and they are what's happening is that they're being discussed through the lens of sexism.
Yeah. Well, say a little bit
No,
about
at the same time, he, has been very clear to say that, that he wants to hear any accusations that his behavior has, been seen as sexist or misogynistic, and takes that seriously.
Yeah. Well, I can say that Elizabeth Croydon thing, because two people that signed a letter saying about discrediting her, Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers, basically said, for the viewers that don't know, that she's sort of known in her area for making these kind of charges. She even made these charges against Kevin Zeese, and it was dismissed by a court order or something like that. But that's really interesting, because then it becomes like we're supposed to believe women, but not all women. And then it put me in mind of how the liberal women, like the Deborah Messings of the world, are not believing Tara Reade. And so here we have now progressive women not believing Elizabeth Croydon. But I just want to make that observation. No need to comment on it.
Well, and I would add that this is a really particular case, and there's been a lot written about this on Medium that people can find if they want. And we've interviewed a number of the people who are mentioned in those Medium pieces, so I can vouch that those pieces seem fundamentally sound. Croydon previously, on multiple occasions, had alleged that Shahid was implicated in the murder of a friend of his, or a cover-up of a murder of a friend of his, as well as some violent trafficking of women at parties, just wild, unsubstantiated, meritless allegations, and those were not mentioned in her later Medium post where she alleged the harassment. So, that I think that's one of the reasons that people are casting doubt on the credibility of the more recent
Right.
one. So, wait a minute. Well, if you're implicating him in a murder cover-up, that's a pretty big deal. What happened to that?
Well, let's talk about sexism versus sexual harassment, because this puts me in mind of what happened to my friend Arturo Carmona, who was the director of Latino outreach on the Bernie Sanders campaign, and then became the political director for or the deputy political director for Bernie. And nobody wanted to work with him. They said he was sexist. They said he was misogynist, and it got conflated with sexual harassment. And I think it kind of ruined his political career. Hello, little son of Ryan. So I'm just, I know a couple of people who have come to me independently when this came out. They were interviewed, not that they went to Shahid's campaign for a job, but they were recruited or they were solicited to work on the campaign. And each of these women who I know personally shared with me very negative stories that showed, that kind of gave credence to the sexism thing. But what do you think? I mean, like, if we were to get rid of every sexist man in politics, we wouldn't probably have very few men in politics. So I don't know if there's any there. But you haven't found that anybody is out to destroy him, that this, is orchestrated, have you? You haven't done any original reporting on this story, have you?
Well, I think people sometimes blow out of proportion the nefarious nature of coordination. I think it's okay to coordinate. Oh Lord, it's getting loud here. Sorry. So if you believe that you have been harmed, I don't think there's anything wrong with reaching out to someone else who you suspect has also been harmed and talking to them about what you should do about this joint harm that you have experienced. And if you learn about a third person, then it's okay, I think, to talk to them. And then if you decide, okay, well, what are we going to do about this? And you understand that you're facing all of the kind of patriarchal, misogynistic structures that you're up against, that you are okay kind of coordinating and figuring out the best way to come forward. At the same time, if you're responding to allegations, I think it's also fine to say what is the best way to respond to these allegations. So in some ways, I think coordinating is okay, but there has to be truth there. Has to be true.
You know, and again, this is a generational thing too, because, you know, I think back about the Aziz Ansari story, where that was just like a bad date. And liberal women sort of my age, you know, your Caitlin Flanagans and your Barry Weisses said, oh, get over it. We women have had to deal with this for so long. This new generation doesn't want to deal with a bad date. They don't want to deal with sexism. So it's kind of like the standards are changing. And I guess I'm wondering, do you feel that politicians should be held to a higher standard, that maybe we shouldn't be, if somebody turns out to be a sexist or a misogynist, we shouldn't be elevating them to public office?
I think that's, you know, because elections become zero-sum games, that's up to every individual voter to decide, you know, what's more important to them, the quality of the human being who's in that office, and the ability of that person to kind of shape the culture of leadership, or whether they don't care at all about that. They just want somebody who's going to vote the right way and make sure that everybody has health care or whatever. I think each side there, you know, has an argument that they could make, but I think people ought to be decent and support a better world. How about that?
That's a good answer. I have 3 questions on Kamala, and depending on how quickly you answer them, we can get you out of here in 4 minutes. I wanted to know, first of all, what you thought of his choice. I mean, he obviously wanted to have a Black woman, and I don't think he needed this particular Black woman to get either Blacks or women to vote for him. Bernie people obviously would have preferred of his short list Karen Bass, and yet he picked Kamala, who we really can't stand, because as I sent you more information, even than Laura Basilton wrote in her New York Times article about her atrocious criminal justice and racial justice record, not to mention the stuff with the foreclosures and the corporate, you know, Medicare fraud, you know, all the stuff that she's done. What do you think of his, well, not what do you think of his choice, but why do you think he went with her politically?
Well, my understanding is that he got an enormous amount of pressure, not from his donors, particularly Wall Street donors, not to choose Elizabeth Warren. And he was not getting significant counter pressure to choose Elizabeth Warren. And I think, you know, I think she made a strategic mistake in not endorsing Bernie Sanders after it was apparent that she wasn't going to win anymore. Because at that point, either Bernie Sanders wins and she's his whatever she is for him, or Joe Biden wins and needs to bring the party together and wants to look for a compromise candidate, and then Bernie and kind of his movement are then pushing for him to choose her. But because she didn't do that, she kind of put herself in the league of the other centrist or, you know, kind of Democratic Party loyalist candidates. Centrist isn't the right word exactly. And then there was no base, because her base of kind of educated suburban voters is, you know, might prefer her to Kamala Harris, but is enthusiastic about Kamala Harris too. They're fine. Like, you know, they would have been happy with Elizabeth Warren. They would have been happy with Amy Klobuchar. They would have been happy with Kamala Harris. And so that means that if you don't pick her, there's nobody that you're offending. And you can see. I'm
not really talking about those two. I'm talking about the Black women that he
and so that's what. So here's why I say that. You can see that the truth of that dynamic in the fact that Karen Bass, who nobody had nationally heard of a couple weeks ago, became such a contender for the position, and he needed so much oppo, you know, dropped on her to kind of knock her out, because there's this real, you know, pull within the Biden camp to say we do need to unite the party. We don't want to lose through lack of enthusiasm from progressive voters. So it's not going to be Warren. So who else could it possibly be? And the bench is so small on the left particularly when you're talking about elected officials who are women, that they wound up with Karen Bass, very talented, accomplished person, but just a member of Congress, not a senator, not a governor, and so that for whatever reason didn't come through, and so you get Kamala Harris. The best thing that can be said about her is that she's kind of a weather vane politician, and that if the left can show that the wind is blowing in their direction, that she has shown that that's the direction that she's willing to go. It's not as if she's kind of deeply hostile personally.
Well, it's interesting because Richard Eskow wrote an article, and I mentioned to him private message that I thought when he said that he didn't think either Biden or Kamala were ideological. I don't think that's true. I mean, I interviewed Branko Marcetic, who wrote, the biography of him for 9 minutes, and he happens to be extremely center right, and one thing that stood out to me was anytime he had a chance to use his bipartisanship, it was to try to get Democrats to move to the rightward position. And Kamala Harris may have been voting as a senator liberal, but she knows that none of those things are going to get passed in Mitch McConnell's Senate. So, and Dave Dayen wrote today that what we need to do, and also Richard Eskow said this too, is hold their feet. The job for grassroots is to hold them accountable. And my opinion is the grassroots is too fragmented. We've got so many different causes and issues we're working on. We know that the liberal Democrats are not going to hold them accountable. They're just going to go back to brunch. So I feel like what we're in danger of is if we have 4 or 8 more years of neoliberal, neoconservative government and material conditions for the 99% don't improve, then next time we're going to get a smarter, more ideological fascist. That's my final question on that.
That's certainly a huge risk and something that everybody needs to watch out for. People are even angrier today than they were in 2009 at the bottom of that financial crisis. And I think you're right that the country and the world have kind of 2 directions that they could go, and God help us if it goes the wrong way.
Well, Wall Street, that front page of, I forget what paper it was today, the Wall Street Journal said that Wall Street is elated with his choice. So I think the way it's going to go, personally, I'm pessimistic that they're going to be able to be swayed toward the progressive end. So, I'm voting green. I'm not going to ask you how you're going to vote because that's a personal question. But if you want to drop off, I'm just going to conclude with some closing remarks, and you could get back to your family. And thank you for staying longer than you had planned to.
No, thank you so much for having me.
And thanks for your great reporting.
All right, see you soon.
All right, bye-bye. Okay, everyone. So that was Ryan Grimm, who is the politics reporter for The Intercept and also for TYT Politics. And I really feel very fortunate to have him on just the day after he wrote this great article exposing what happened to Alex Morse. And I actually did invite Alex Morse to be on my show last week. It's really funny. And I got a message back from somebody who said he wasn't going to have time. And I was kind of, after this whole thing hit, I was thinking, oh, maybe he was worried that this was going to break and he didn't want to be asked about it. But regardless, I'll have him on again. I think he sounds like a great guy as far as the policies go. And I'm trying to put together a show for tomorrow night with the Bernie delegates who are doing sort of an alternative convention this weekend, actually. It's going to be 2 very long Zoom meetings that everybody's going to be invited to. And in my show tomorrow, I'm going to hopefully give you a preview of what it's going to be. But let's put it this way. It's going to be the opposite of what the Democratic platform is. It's going to be pro-Green New Deal, pro-Medicare for all, pro-foreign policy that is not all about war and militarism. I find it interesting that as a member of the press, I got the press release from the DNC, and they said at our convention, which I personally am boycotting, I have no interest in watching any of that. At our convention, we're going to be discussing foreign policy with former military men or generals and Republicans. So that is the Democrats' foreign policy. And as I love to recount, people who have seen me talk about this before, my experience as a Bernie 2016 delegate, when we were chanting no more war, the Hillary delegates were instructed to chant over us, USA, USA. And that was, as everybody knows, Trump's chant. So I want to thank everybody for watching this show. Please share it. If you haven't seen me before, I've been doing this show for, oh my gosh, in December it'll be 4 years. I focus on organizing and activism. I also have progressive politicians, progressive candidates, and other independent journalists like Ryan and authors. So you can follow me on Twitter at Lauren_Steiner, and subscribe to my YouTube channel where I will be posting this show, Lauren from LA. So in the meantime, stay safe, wear your mask, and keep fighting.